Hey, InterVarsity alumni. This is After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. This is both an exciting and potentially tricky transition that you're making, and you might feel a little unsure about the coming weeks and months. We're here to provide you with expert advice, practical skills, and plenty of encouragement as you learn how to keep saying yes to Jesus in your new context. This is After 4, and this podcast is for you, alumni. What's up, alumni? Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele. Well, we've made it to our final alumni interview about vocational transition. This week, we're chatting with Milwaukee School of Engineering alumna Nikky Fujimoto. And what I love about this chat is that from the beginning, Nikky makes it clear that she sees transition and her workplace as an opportunity to follow Jesus and engage her coworkers with love and hospitality. She has some really cool stories from her time at work, and I'm excited to share them with you today. Here's Nikky, and this one's for you, alumni. Hello, Nikky. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to having our conversation today, talking about what your transition to work after graduation has been like, navigating a new season of life in some new ways. Before we do that, though, Nikky, just help the rest of us get to know you a little bit. Who are you, Nikky?
I'm Nikky Fujimoto. I was Nikky Wisey back when I was in InterVarsity, though, so new last name. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am an alumni from Milwaukee School of Engineering, MSOE, and I am a mechanical design engineer at Milwaukee Tool.
Now, when you say Milwaukee Tool, do you mean like the red box Milwaukee saw that I have in my garage? Is that the Milwaukee that you're talking about?
Exactly. Yeah. Milwaukee Electric Tool, kind of your power tool company.
Okay.
They call themselves solutions provider. So not just power tools, but power tools and a lot more now.
Nikky, you may have just climbed the ranks as far as one of the coolest conversations that we're about to have. So that's pretty awesome. How long have you worked with Milwaukee?
I've been there almost 4 years now. My department, it's been a fun department to work in. They do a lot of different things, vacuums and fans, but also the radios and the heated gear. So that's my department that I work in. While we're on the topic of Milwaukee Tool, before we go any further, I want to add just a quick disclaimer that my kind of opinions that I'm sharing here don't necessarily represent Milwaukee Tool's positions, strategies, or opinions on these topics.
That makes a lot of sense. That's always helpful to name those things before we jump in. And with those things in mind, as we're starting to get a feel for some of the, kind of hands-on work that you do, you're gonna help us as we continue to get a feel for what it's like to make this transition to life after graduation. So tell me, Nikky, as you think about that time of transition, you were in school, you graduated, and you move into the full-time working world. What were those early days of that transition like for you? And was there anything about your experience as an engineer or the specific job that you stepped into that flavored that experience for you?
I think it's helpful for me to kind of take a step back of when I was a freshman in college, I wasn't a Christian, and InterVarsity helped me to get to know God. And I would almost describe my growth with InterVarsity as like a pressure cooker, and I was just so hungry to continue to learn about God. And I had talked with some of my other alumni and friends about that transition and had an expectation kind of going into it that I may not have that same exponential growth for the rest of my spiritual journey in my life. And then especially kind of coming out of college where you have this constant community with InterVarsity around you. That community will look different and take more intentionality. Yeah. So I think I had that expectation walking out of school, but experiencing it, I think, was a different thing. I think one other thing that I had started learning my senior year, and was an interesting transition point, was the concept of rest and Sabbath.
Yeah.
Just being in engineering school it was really tough and it was really busy on top of working an internship part-time and doing college athletics and any other sort of clubs and orgs on campus, including InterVarsity. If you're familiar with the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 3.
Okay.
And it was one of those where I had accomplished a lot, but like at what cost? I didn't get a lot of sleep in college, and it was something that I wore as a badge of honor. And kind of my senior year of college, God started showing me this lesson of rest and slowing down and like that gift that he gives us of, you know, his yoke is easy, his burden is light. And there was an InterVarsity book, Sabbath Keeping, that I ended up reading. And I remember, you know, I had this exponential growth throughout all of my career, and there was just so many like big lessons that I had to keep learning. And so I remember getting ready to like open up and read this book my senior year and like, okay, God, I'm ready for the gut punch of growth. And it was more of just like a breath of fresh air. And I was like, oh, okay, God, like what a blessing, what a gift that you're giving me. And I started that my senior year of college, trying to do like 24 hours of Sabbath. And to be honest, when I first started doing it, I hated it. It kind of sucked because I remember I was like, I have my to-do list of things that I'm wanting to accomplish every day. And I could just, that was what I did for 24 hours, was just like think about my to-do list and not do my to-do list. And eventually it took probably a month or two to grow in this habit of like, oh, I can stop and rest and delight and like worship God on this day. And it's a day to recharge and to just be more intentional on what I'm doing on the days that I work. And so that was something that I learned a lot my senior year and wanted to bring into kind of full-time work. In college, there's that expectation to continue to do your work outside of class. And there can be a pressure as you're moving into full-time to want to keep that rhythm going. And I think it was just an encouragement that it's okay to give my best at work, but not always bring that work home.
Now, obviously, the job that you're doing is not the same as, like, there's lots of different versions of engineering. So there's some amount of generalizing that I'm asking you to do here. But based on your experience as a student engineer and now full-time professional in the world of engineering with Milwaukee Tool, like, are there particular places in this area of like work-life balance or work-rest balance that make it especially challenging to lean into stepping back and taking that time of rest? Like, are there expectations that are set on you or that you set on yourself that's fairly common in the world of engineering? Or like, what has that experience been like for you? These are some of the places where it feels challenging, or like this is where it's actually much easier because of the work that I do to be able to step back and take a break.
Yeah, that's a great question. One place to start is just realizing God created work and he created us. God is a creator. And I think another way that I like to even think about God is as like a problem solver. There is a lot of brokenness in the world, and he continuously knits together creative endings and solutions to things in ways that I wouldn't have expected. And I think being an engineer allows us to funnel that characteristic of God as an engineer, creatively solving problems, building a better world. And I think work is a really good thing until it becomes an idol. And that's true for engineers, and that's true for any field.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it ties into that challenge I said earlier, where in college, you have that expectation to continuously do work. Like there's no kind of differentiation of your workday. And as a new engineer, it can be challenging if you're trying to prove yourself. And I think it's good to say yes to a lot of new things. That's how you grow and how you learn. But I think starting to learn what your capacity is something that sets kind of new engineers from more experienced engineers. What does your bandwidth look like? How long does it take you to do a task? And being able to effectively communicate that to your leaders. At first, especially my first year of working, I thought it was bad to admit that my workload was too much. I thought people would kind of look down on me for that.
Yeah.
But I realized that being able to better estimate my time and communicate that was a sign of just like maturing and becoming a better engineer.
Yeah. Have you found yourself like more effective as a result of being able to name those limits and actually saying like, okay, this is where I need to stop so that tomorrow when I come back, I haven't like overspent? Is it actually helpful long term to slow down in those places?
Absolutely. In my first year, I found myself working too many hours. And the comment back to me was, well, you're not working as many hours as this person. And
Oh,
I kind of actually had a flip in my head of work is important and I want to do that for God, but I don't want to do that work to glorify myself. And so I
hmm.
kind of had this switch in my head of I want to kind of prioritize God and wanted to kind of prioritize my own health and my relationship with others, and ended up trying to leave at 4 p.m. each day and ended up getting promoted a month later anyway. And it was one of those where I had realized I was almost more efficient with my time when I
Hmm.
set good work-life boundaries.
And then you still end up getting promoted anyways. What was that experience like for you, still getting a promotion after sort of being nudged in the other direction?
I think it just gave me that perspective of how much God is in control and
Hmm.
how God can honor your obedience to him.
Let's lean even further into some of this thinking. What are the things that you're learning about what it looks like to partner with God in the work that you're doing? Like, what does it look like to enter into the context of work every day saying, I'm a Jesus follower in this place? And whether that's doing the projects that you've been given or interacting with your colleagues. What does it mean to be a Christ follower and somebody who is purposefully partnering with Jesus in the context of your work?
So I had mentioned earlier that I was not a Christian when I started college, and
Yeah.
InterVarsity had such a big impact on me. And so in my senior year, as I was narrowing down job options, I'd narrowed down a bunch of engineering options between Milwaukee Tool, and then actually I had a full-time offer with InterVarsity staff.
Okay.
And that was something on my heart of,
Nice.
do I be an engineer or do I go on staff full-time with
Yeah.
InterVarsity? Very different positions. And I had 24 hours to decide by the time I got both offers in hand, and was just kind of praying to God of what should my path be. And I had just so many signs within kind of those 24 hours of go to Milwaukee Tool.
Hmm.
And there were times where it might be some of just imposter syndrome, wondering, am I smart enough to be an engineer? Am I qualified enough, even though I have an engineering degree? Imposter syndrome can just be a very challenging thing. And at my workplace, wanting to use that as a mission field. And I had been there and I had had kind of conversations with some other people, but I was actually at Urbana 2018. And my husband and I were actually volunteering in the prayer room there, but we had just been catching up with some friends over dinner, and they had just mentioned that there's a workplace ministry at their corporate office, and something about that kind of got stuck in my heart. And while we were in kind of large group worship, I had just kind of this thought planted in my head of like, that's why I planted you at Milwaukee Tool. It was like a year and a half later, 2 years, I was still kind of asking God, like, why am I at Milwaukee Tool? And there had been kind of a reorg and shuffling of people within my department. And in my department of probably about 100 people, I discovered that there were like 5 or 6 people that were like God-loving, Jesus-loving people. And in engineering, there's not a lot of Christians. Oftentimes, it's a very secular environment. And I had gotten really excited from this call coming out of Urbana to start a workplace ministry. And so it started with prayer meetings in my director's office.
Wow.
Praying for our coworkers, for our department, just for Milwaukee Tool, praying for our community, praying for each other, and have kind of over the last year have just built up this community. And so we have about 40 people now, not just in our department, but just kind of like across the company. And that has just been a really cool opportunity to realize that there's a movement actually within kind of corporate world of workplace ministries starting in all different companies. And I would not have known that until I kind of started this process and got connected with other different corporate groups and realized that there's kind of a fire and a hunger for these conversations at work. And this group, I think, has given me more kind of boldness and excitement to just have conversations at work. And I'm realizing that there's just so much God is already doing on the hearts of people. And people are interested. People are curious.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people that they love asking questions and digging into things. And engineers are just naturally very curious people. And Jesus is such a fascinating guy that it's been more natural than I thought to start those conversations with people.
Wow. That's really exciting to hear a story like that. Something that, starts with this invitation at Urbana, moves into some people that are, meeting regularly for prayer. And now you said you have like 40 people in this community that are is that like strictly in your department, or is that across like multiple groups of people, or are those like, these are just the people that I'm like working with, doing projects with day in and day out that are a part of this together?
This has been just kind of word of mouth across several different departments, specifically in the people in the Milwaukee location. It's been cool to build those relationships with other Christians. And I think it has also challenged me and encouraged me to keep building relationships with all of my other coworkers that I'm doing projects with.
Have these primarily been other people that are already following Jesus? They're looking for common, like, I'm looking for somebody else that I can connect with on this. Or have there been people who are, you said you're surrounded by curious engineers. Have there also been people that are like, yeah, I don't follow Jesus, but I'm kind of intrigued by this community or by studying more about him? Like, what has the makeup of the group looked like?
At this point, the group has mostly been Christians, and it has been one of those surprises of, wow, there are a number of Christians in the workplace, but sometimes there's this fear to reach out or talk about your faith. And I think one of the coolest Bible studies that we ended up doing was at the end, some guy had realized, like, wow, I had never thought about getting to know my coworkers and loving them in that way. And that was one of those moments of like, yes, like that's the point. That's the goal of this group, is to start realizing that your workplace is also a mission field. Whether you go on InterVarsity staff or become a missionary overseas, or you go work at Milwaukee Tool and be an engineer and design power tools. That's been another area of growth for myself, is this concept of like biblical hospitality. And hospitality, when it's translated from the Greek, literally means like the love of strangers. And it's this kind of quality or disposition of receiving and treating guests and strangers in a warm, friendly, and generous way. And kind of this is commanded and it's commended kind of all throughout Scripture. And getting to know people so that you can serve them and love them and help meet their needs. And that's, I think, a goal that I have in the workplace. And I had the opportunity with my friend. She was from India. She was doing her master's in Texas, and just through a bunch of connections, ended up having someone ask if I could kind of be her welcome committee and get her settled into the Milwaukee area. And so she's an engineer at Milwaukee Tool. And she didn't have a car here. And so she's like, hey, would you help give me a ride for like the first kind of 2 weeks that I was there? And 2 weeks actually ended up turning into 4 months. And I remember my heart posture at first about this was kind of frustrated at her of like, oh, this is so inconvenient for me. And it was one of those other moments where a thought was planted in my head of, hospitality is not always convenient. Loving people is not always convenient. And by the end of 4 months, like, I loved giving her rides. I loved having conversation. I loved building that relationship with her, not giving her rides anymore, but very intentional about spending time with her, hanging out. And I think that was an area where God has been challenging me to get to know my coworkers.
As you think about relationship building with coworkers, as you think about hospitality, whether it's with the specific purpose of, man, I really want to share Jesus with my coworkers, or that it's like, it's just good to get to know people in the space beyond just doing work together. Where are the openings for developing more relationships with your colleagues, and where are the places that it's hard to do as well?
I think specifically to engineering, it depends what role you're in. Milwaukee Tool is very much, we want you in person so that we can build that collaboration. They want to do a lot of team building because there is that value of when you build those relationships, you also build trust. And when you build trust, you start to work together. I think one of the reasons you start to work together is there's more of an openness in communications that you can give feedback back and forth to grow each other, to encourage each other, and being able to be intentional about getting to know your coworkers helps to do that. I think Milwaukee Tool is a very young company.
Okay.
A lot of the people around me are under 30.
Okay.
And so if you think about a lot of your professional power tools are designed by a bunch of just 20-year-olds, brilliant 20-year-olds. But
yeah, that's awesome.
It can be easier to connect with people that are in a similar stage of life. I think depending on your engineering field, oftentimes that average age can be a lot older.
Okay.
And it can be difficult to develop those relationships, or they look different when you have people that are in different stages of life. And I think an encouragement is realizing those people that have been in the industry for years, they have a lot of excellent knowledge.
Nikky, as you think about your experiences up to this point, as you think about the transition that you've made and the years that you've been able to sort of work through that, two things. One, what are you learning that you really love about your work? And two, what's a piece of advice that you would give to another engineering alum who is stepping into their version of this context for the first time after they graduate?
I think one thing that I love about my job right now is the opportunity that they give for growth. They have been just very invested in, what are you interested in doing? How do you want to keep growing? And the thing for those opportunities for growth, they're almost always out of your comfort zone. And so I've gotten a lot more comfortable with that practice of being comfortable, of being uncomfortable. And I think an aspect of that is both in engineering, but I think it's great practice for bringing my whole self to work and being able to talk about Jesus with people too. And I think just some advice that I would give to someone stepping into your new engineering role, don't be afraid to ask questions. The engineers that ask really good questions are the ones that are really good at their job. I think another point is just be generous. Challenge yourself to live below your means. Pay off your debt and bless others. And not only be generous with your finances, but just be generous with your time that you have as well. This can look like even in the workplace. It looks different being someone that is so open and willing to help other people, to kind of step in and support them. But in the ways that you just serve and love your community. I think the last thing too was in one of the prayer meetings that I had in my director's office, he used the phrase kind of the gospel is delicious, kind of referencing Colossians 4:6. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. And kind of we had talked about that of, people like different seasonings when it comes to food. And this reminder and encouragement to get to know the people that are at your workplace so that you can kind of love them and have those conversations with them and be able to have them kind of taste the gospel that's delicious to them.
That's amazing. I mean, that's phenomenal advice across the board. And the gospel is delicious. That is a great word for sure. And what is that seasoning that helps make the gospel delicious to the people around you? Like, what are the things that they need to hear, that they need to be invited into? What are the parts of the good news of the gospel that make it good news to the people around you? And that's phenomenal. I love that. Nikky, thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing these experiences. I'm grateful for just your thoughtfulness, and it's been clear from the beginning of our conversation that you are someone who is working very hard to clarify for yourself and for those around you what it means that Jesus was at your place of work long before you were, and that he has invited you into that space with him to do the work that he's already doing, and that is something that you're very mindful of, that your work is something that matters to God, that the people that you work with matter to God, and the way that you engage with those things together, it really matters. And that is something that I think all of us can really be encouraged and refreshed in as we continue to think about the ways that we engage with work. If you're somebody that's been working for a long time, to keep those things in mind, or for our young alumni, as they're looking ahead towards work and establishing, how am I going to think about this part of my life, to say, like, think about it this way, as something that really matters to the Lord. And so what does it look like to do your work with him? And so I'm just really grateful for that perspective that you've brought, like, through each of the things that we've talked about here. That's been really refreshing and helpful. And Nikky, thanks a lot for your investment, for your stories, and for being one of our many amazing alumni who are working alongside Jesus in the context that he's called them into.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I'm still thinking about Nikky's story about biblical hospitality at work. When she gave her new coworker a ride to work for 4 months when the initial ask was for a couple of weeks. How often do those two ideas live side by side for us? Hospitality and work. When I think of hospitality, so often that feels restricted to something that happens at home. To put that in the context of work is really paradigm shifting for me. How can I open my rhythms, my resources, and ultimately myself to my coworkers? What can I do to treat them in a warm, friendly, and generous way? And how might that impact our working relationship? Could it develop into a trusting friendship? Could it be something that God wants to use to make himself known to the people he loves so deeply? What do you think? Are there ways that you can show hospitality to your coworkers? I'm going to throw a couple of our past episodes in the show notes that might spark some ideas for you. Nikky, thanks so much for joining us and for sharing your heart for partnering with Jesus in your work as an engineer. And thanks for being super cool and working at Milwaukee Tool. That's going to be a tough one to beat. Alumni, come back next week for our closing episode on the topic of vocational transition. We're going to hear a few final thoughts from recent guests about their experience with this transition before jumping into the first half of our next series, One Simple Way to Stay Connected with Your Chapter. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today, alumni. If there was anything that you learned, really enjoyed, or that encouraged you from today's episode, would you send us a DM or tag us in a story? We'd love to hear about it. You can find us at After4Pod on Instagram and Facebook. And if you haven't already, take just a second to unlock your phone and subscribe to the podcast. If your platform lets you, leave us a rating and a review. And if you like what we're doing here, share us with your InterVarsity or other post-graduation friends. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you in the after, alumni.